We're here for another exciting webinar. And so welcome everyone to the third in our webinar series. Today, we're going to discuss a topic of data-driven marketing and how you can grow your business by measuring the right KPIs. I'm Ben, I'm the head of content here at Elementor, the website building platform that empowers web creators and powers millions of WordPress websites. And be sure, before we start, be sure to never miss one of these amazing monthly webinars and click on the subscribe button below and you'll get a reminder to attend the upcoming ones. And now I want to introduce you to today's special guest. And since 2016, Kieran Flanagan is the VP of Marketing and Growth at HubSpot, one of the leading marketing companies, offering software products for inbound marketing, sales, and customer service. Kieran was part of actually the early team to grow out the freemium business at HubSpot, accounting for growing free users and revenue. Kieran has a proven track record in helping SaaS businesses from startups to enterprise level grow their business, grow their traffic, users, and revenue. He's a thought leader on growth marketing and speaks at events across the globe on the topic. And in this webinar, we will help you become an expert in your customer, focus on the business best growth levers, develop the perfect customer acquisition playbook for your business. I'm very excited. And Kieran, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Ben. I'm very excited to be on.
So let's just see that everything is working in the chat and in the video. I see Alexa from the UK, so shout out to everyone. You can just say where you're from. And Kieran, I gave you an introduction, but maybe you can give a short one as well.
Yeah, that's a pretty good introduction, I guess. Like I'm based in Dublin, Ireland. So the kind of interesting thing I've had to do since 2016 is also do a lot of remote work. So most of my teams are based in the States. So we've been getting used to remote work. I feel like everyone is getting used to remote work over the past kind of 2 months, and we've all had that experience. But I think most of my introduction, you did a better job than I would have done myself.
Yeah, and you actually, you also give talks and appear in conferences. Is this in the United States or in the UK or both?
I've kind of done a lot of talking across Europe. I've done some in the States, and what's great for me about there's not much great about the kind of pandemic, but the good thing for me is I do not like flying, and all of the events have moved virtual, which is amazing. So I'm doing a lot of virtual speaking, which I enjoy. You save the flight, you don't have to do the one night stay, and you become exhausted when you're flying back the next day.
But you lose all the breakfast.
You lose the breakfast and the dinners. And that's probably the best part, I think, sometimes about doing the events. But yeah, I'm getting used to the virtual event speaking, which I'm enjoying.
That's cool. And I'm really excited about the topic we're going to talk about because, you know, everyone is talking about, it's kind of common knowledge that you need to be data-driven in your marketing, in your business. But when you're talking to the context of building websites and managing and marketing websites, what does it actually mean to be data-driven?
Yeah, I think one thing to start with data itself, and then it's both good and bad for marketers and good and bad for businesses. I think that we have become so reliant on data because we have such better tools. Like we have so many more ways that we can capture data that sometimes we kind of get stuck and not want to make decisions anymore until we have all of the data we need. And I think there's a real art to being able to get just enough data to make a decision and then using some of your experience and some of your skill sets to kind of make that decision faster than you would have if you had to wait months and months to get like every single piece of data you can get. I think when you're building websites, there's two parts to it, right? There's one of the big things that happens when you build a website is you're always kind of making somewhat of a leap of faith. And you can go onto Google and you can kind of Google some of the best stories of large brands who have spent 30 million plus on rebranding their website only to realize it converts better or converts worse. It works worse. I think there's a good story out there with Marks and Spencer's, which is a big retail brand in Europe. And then there's others that have had to do huge rollbacks when their large, expensive site did not convert or work that well. And the challenge for that is that you are kind of releasing a huge amount of change all at once. And one of the things you can use data for, and that we try to do, is do a ton of minimal viable tests to get information to know if the design and the development direction we're taking is actually the right one. So instead of just trying to make all of these changes at once, we try to incrementally make them over time. And then at the end of that, you have a brand new website. And then the other thing you can do, what we try to do when we're going to launch new versions of our website, is look at data to see how people are using and navigating the site. So we look at common paths, exit pages, common entry pages, and try to figure out if we can get the right data to know if we're making the right decisions in that new site launch. But I think there's like two sides to that. There's quantitative and qualitative. So you need to do your user research. Some of the best data comes from just talking to people who navigate the website. We can kind of go into some of the ways you can do that. So I think there's some of the things that I think are really pivotal in becoming data driven towards your website builds.
Is it? It's all talking about decision making. So how, like, what's the right balance that you're talking about between like relying on your taste, on your gut feeling, and relying on data? Is there a balance? Can you be too much data driven?
You could definitely be too much data driven. I think a lot of people in tech are too much data driven, right? Because we have the ability to get all of this data, so we think we should have. And the other thing is, having data is great because it de-risks your choice or your decision. So the more data you have, the less risky your decision should be, because you know more or less you're making a right or wrong decision. And that can lead to everything taking longer to do because it takes time to gather all this information. And then there's a lot of data that's not black and white. Like if I go to a website, I see this all the time where you go to a website and people say, oh, well, I'm going to rebuild my website because there's a high bounce rate. A high bounce rate is not a really great metric. It's not black and white. It's hard to infer if that's a good or bad thing. You could have a high bounce rate because that page answers the exact question that a person has, and they got exactly what they needed from. So not all metrics are black and white. So I think that there is some amount of data you can use to help you de-risk a decision. And if you think about your decision-making process, it's really about risk and time to make that decision, like the opportunity cost of taking a lot of time to make that decision. And I think you need to try to figure out what is the right balance. Like how much data do I need to de-risk this enough, but how quickly should I make this decision to make sure that the opportunity cost of prolonging this decision is not really high. And that's the way that I think about decisions, like large decisions that we have to make, and trying to get the balance right between the amount of data we need to make that decision and how quickly we need to make that decision. Because sometimes just making a decision, like if we're going into just decision-making process, is better. It's better being wrong than making no decision at all, because you can always retroactively change something.
Let's take an actual example. So I'm building a website, and I'm building my own website. I'm a freelance, web designer, and I want to attract more clients, and I want to attract more leads. I'm building my, marketing plan and strategy. What are the steps you would recommend to start implementing, understanding which data to collect and how to collect it?
Yeah. So, and is it just for marketing in general or building the website? Because there's a ton of stuff you can use data for in content marketing and other forms of marketing, but is it more anything marketing related or just website building?
It's general marketing. Yeah. All around.
Yeah, I guess there's tons of like quick things you can do. I think content marketing has a lot of interesting uses of data. So like one of the things that is fascinating to do is to go and reverse engineer communities, right? Because if you're trying to build content, you're like, okay, well, what content is really great content for my customer? And the first thing, if I was going to be an expert on anything, if I was in business and trying to grow a business, I would prefer to be an expert on my customer than an expert on data. And so what that means is I am continually talking to my customer at all times of my growth. So whether I'm a solopreneur or I'm in a company of 50 people, like I have talking to my customer as a habit of how I do work. But what's fascinating is if you think about how all of these communities work, like Reddit or Quora, they work through upvoting the best content, right? And so if you can actually reverse engineer those platforms and look to the content topics that are relevant to your persona, you can actually have a wealth of information about what content to create. So if you go to Quora or Reddit and don't, take everything I say as you need to go and check what's legal and what's not. So like you can use tools to scrape them, like import.io, maybe that is or not, that is or is not against the terms of service. You should check that. I'm not advocating you do that. You can use tools like Ahrefs and all of these tools that can actually help you to reverse engineer those communities. Look for the most popular content that's relevant to your persona. And it's already telling you what people love because they are upvoting it. And you can actually, through scraping tools, you could actually get the upvotes and all of these type of things if it's legal. If it's not, please do not do that. Use like Ahrefs or tools like that. And so there's fascinating things, or you could just like manually go do that, right? You don't need to automate it. So there's fascinating ways you can use data to kind of reverse engineer back into communities. That's something I think is pretty fascinating. It's also a great way to get user research and customer research. Like if you go in and start to actually see what these people are discussing and talking about.
You actually come from a computer science background. So how does this mix work? I mean, how important it is to understand these things when you're trying to do, data-driven marketing?
Yeah, I think the marketing is kind of broken into like there's part art, part science. And I think the part that is still more important than any other part to marketing is the art. It's like, how do you tell inspirational and educational stories? Like Elementor are great at this, right? You guys are a fabulous content brand. You tell stories that both inspire and educate your audience. And that's an integral part to your brand. I'm sure you can speak to that as well, because you're the core brain behind that. And that is like, that is part just understanding your customer, right? And I think that is the talking to your customer, understanding your customer, and you can reverse engineer these communities. And I think the thing that coming from a computer science was always good for me in marketing is I automatically think about, okay, this is a good thing to do. How can I scale that to be really big? But just the small things like sitting with your customers and knowing the things that they care about, and being able to tell that story and educate those people and create a brand around that, it's still for me way more important than the data piece. But then there is the part about the data piece, which is like, how do I course correct through data? So first of all, what's really important about data is how to only focus on a small amount of it. And so how do you know what are the most important metrics for me to focus on to grow my business? So a good example is if I'm in a SaaS company of 10 people and I'm like, okay, well, there's so many, like I'm sure in Elementor, you guys have tons of metrics that you can look at. But if I'm in a really small company, I don't have the resources to look at the same amount of metrics as maybe you do or a HubSpot does. And so if I need to generate 5 customers a month, and I look back and say, okay, well, I have this really simplistic business. I get people to my website, I get them to take a trial of my product, and then I get a customer. And I go back from customer to free trial and say, how many people who start the free trial become customers? I go back from free trial to traffic. And I say, well, how many people from the website actually convert into a free trial? And then I say, how do I generate my 5 customers a month? And I go, okay, the thing I need to do is increase traffic. And that's the only thing I'm going to care about for the next 3 months. The thing I need to do is improve my visit to trial rate. That's the only thing I'm going to do for the next 3 months. And it's really, how do you focus in on the right data rather than getting overwhelmed by all of it?
Yeah, I totally agree. I also think that when you're researching, that's the time that you can actually talk to your clients. I mean, but once you have something out there, then you can actually see the reaction through data, see how many shares you got, how many likes, and but I mean, it's hard to pick one metric. I mean, how do you? I mean, from I don't know, conversions to to share, to bounce rate, to scroll through the page. How do you pick and choose and prioritize between your metrics and KPIs? Find your, your what's the word I'm looking for? Like your star,
yeah,
North Star.
Yeah, so I think like it's interesting, right? If you bucket data, you can bucket data into two things, and I'm kind of just thinking about this now, but you can bucket data into the group of things you need to know to make a decision, and then you can bucket data into the things you need to make impact against. And so there's probably more data than one metric that you need to know to be able to make good decisions. Like, should I change my website? Should I focus on this customer persona over this customer persona because the business metrics look better here? Should I share more of this content because the actual share rates and engagement rates in this topic are better than this topic? The thing I'm kind of advocating for is then, which is the most important thing for you to make impact against? Maybe that's what I didn't actually articulate very well now thinking about it. But like the challenge that I see for people is, okay, well, I have hundreds of metrics and I'll try to see if I can make impact against all hundreds. And actually, okay, no, you have all of the data you need to make the decisions you need. And if you need more data to make a decision, you should get that, but you should have just enough to make the core decisions you need to make. And then you need to have even less data in terms of what you're trying to action against. So in that case, when I reverse engineer my funnel, I can say the only way that I'm going to hit 5 customers a month are to increase my traffic. And what I would do is create a little scorecard. And I would say, okay, I need to double my traffic in 3 months. And then I would have each week, what am I doing to increase that traffic? And then a weekly traffic metric. And I think that keeps you very focused on the core metric that you need to action to be successful. And I think that's a good way to think about it, is like decision-making data and data that you need to make impact against.
I think I understand. It's like what you mean is like you need to be informed by a whole lot of data points, but actually the stone that you're trying to pull up the mountain, that should be a specific stone that you need to push on that.
Yeah.
And this way, it's not like when you deal with too many data points, it's like you see, the bounce rate decreased and the traffic increased. You're going to tell the client or whoever you get back to, hey, I succeeded. You're going to highlight what went well, but that's not actually science that's being, diverted through the results.
Yeah. I think it's, it's knowing what is the thing that's going to be integral to your success. And even if you talk to, like, it's interesting, right? If you talk to some of the founders of companies that are the unicorn companies, the billion-dollar companies, you would say, okay, well, they're probably world-class at every single marketing channel and they're probably doing everything well. That's not really true. They're kind of, what they've done is understood what is the core metric or group of metrics that they just need to become world-class at within that 12-month period. And if they do that, they're going to hit their next trajectory of growth. And for even like if I was a solopreneur in a smaller business, I still think that's even more important, especially for startups, because there's all of these things you could do and all of these metrics attached to it. But like, what is the thing you're trying to achieve over the next 3 to 6 months? And what is the core one metric or 2 metrics that you need to just focus in on to be successful against that thing?
Well, there was one question that kind of relates to what you just said, that someone from our community posted before to our Facebook group. And that is, if I'm a small business, then I need to focus on building my expertise as a designer, as a marketer. And sometimes, analytics and data can take a lot of time. So how can you get data to work for you and don't compromise your actual work?
Yeah, exactly. This is exactly the tricky thing and the challenging thing with data. Data should be part of your workflow. It should not disrupt your workflow, right? It is not the thing that is going to make you successful, but it's part of how you can get to where you need to be. And so in that case, how much like if you're trying to build your client list, and if you're trying to gather more clients, it's probably way more important that you become, known for what you do. It's way more important that you create great content that's applicable for that customer. The amount of data you need is probably not that much. Like, you may need to know what content resonates with your persona. You may need to know when they go to your sales page, how do they convert into a client and can you improve that? And then you may need to know what is your repeat order rate. So like if I have a client, how many repeat projects will I get from that client, or whatever the more important metrics they are for you. But when you feel that data is stopping you from doing the things you need to do to actually grow your business, that's when you're becoming over-indexed on data. Like it should be part of your workflow. It should not really disrupt your workflow. And I think we are definitely in danger at times of trying to de-risk the decisions we need to make and stop ourselves from being wrong ever by getting all of the data. And the reality is it's good to be wrong and to learn by doing versus trying to learn by hypothesizing through the data you have.
I know you do a lot of work on actual experiments at HubSpot. Can you tell us like what's the role of experiments and how do you run them and test things?
Yeah, so experiments are usually the highest, the most expensive way to do research. And I say that because it has become really like fashionable to just like, oh, I'll run an experiment. And I think it's better if you think about experiments as one form of research. What an experiment is trying to get you the information you need to see if you should make a decision or not make that decision. In the same way you can get that information through talking to your customers or looking at analytics and looking at data. Experiments are just another form of research, and dependent upon what you want to experiment with, they can be very, very expensive forms of research because you may need developers and designers and to build something. And so when you're thinking about an experiment, the first thing you should think about is, okay, this question I have. So if you need, when you're kind of creating an experiment, the whole thing is the hypothesis is about a question you have about your users, right? You're trying to discover, you're trying to answer something about your customers, your clients, your users.
Yeah, let's say I created a landing page and I think that my users will, let's say I'm promoting my web design business. So I think that my clients will appreciate my, my modern design skills. So I test this as opposed to, my case studies.
Yeah. So like I give you, so like here's the most common mistake I see with experiments, which is a really cool thing to talk about, is like what most marketers do is, and we'll just use the most, traditional red green button. Not that anyone ever does that test, but if we just take that as an example, what a lot of marketers will do and a lot of people will do is say, okay, well, if I change my red button to green, my conversion rate will go up by 10%. That is not really the objective of an experiment. The experiment is like, what do you know what are you trying to prove about your users to be true? So what I mean by that is your hypothesis isn't if I change my button from red to green, my conversion rate goes up by 10%. It should be something like, okay, if I change my button from red to green, more users will click on this button because in Europe, the color green is commonly associated with positivity. I don't know if that's true or not, right? Not even though I'm European, but it's stating what you believe about your users to be true, right? And if you knew that changing your button from red to green would increase by 10%, you should just do it. It's not really an experiment. Like that's the whole thing that the most common mistake I see happening. And so a hypothesis should be trying to prove or disprove something you believe to be true about your users. So again, it's a form of research because you can also talk to your customers. You can also try to look at data to try to get that, but it's a really good form of research because you are actually getting people to do that thing and you can A/B test and actually get real world data back. And so that's the first thing I would say on the experiments is like, you should have an hypothesis about what you believe to be true about your users, and you're trying to prove or disprove that thing through the experiment.
Well, obviously, at HubSpot, you help a lot of businesses do just that. Make the right decisions through software. Can you share a few, examples and maybe case studies that have shown that impact?
On how do we, what decisions have we made through testing?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it ranges from large to small. And so like a lot of what we try to do is around messaging, right? And like how can we better message and how can we better connect to our audience? And that's a lot of website copy tests and landing pages tests. You can really split them into design and copy. And so do your users, are they kind of more drawn toward one aesthetic versus another aesthetic. And you can basically, again, get a lot of quantitative research of why this may be true. So I wouldn't just blindly say, well, this design may be better than this design. I would have done a lot of user research and said, okay, from the user research we have done, it seems like more people gravitate towards videos on our landing pages because they feel like getting the information through a video is more genuine and it feels more real to them. And so if we add more videos in, more of our users will convert. And so we try to break a lot of our website test into kind of copy and design. And so they're one of the places that we've seen a lot of benefit from. A lot of our other, there's just so many tests, but a lot of our other tests we did through our freemium business growth. So it was a big change for us that you could come in, you could use the product, you could start actually doing different things with the product. And then at certain points, you would be asked, you want to like upgrade to the paid version. And so we spent a lot of time talking to customers, talking to users, trying to understand about how much of the product we could include in free, for example, that they would get value from. And so that it would be hugely valuable for that free user audience. But then what would they pay for in a paid tier? And you can kind of experiment with those things. We did a lot of user research into when you're in the product and you want to buy the product, would you like to talk to a salesperson? Would you like to talk to someone through live chat? Would you like to book a meeting with someone through an automated calendar? Would you want to actually do a demo or in-app free trial?
So you're always trying to connect with the client in different ways through chat, through email, and testing out the different hypotheses. How does this work long term? I mean, how do you? It's easy to run one experiment in a landing page, A/B test, and then that's it. You don't have time anymore. How can you actually develop sort of a culture of continuous testing that improves you over time?
Yeah, I think it's part of it. Like, I think the use the correct term, it just becomes part of your culture. And again, I think the culture isn't to run more tests. I think the culture is to be an expert on your customer. And I think if you approach it on that way, then experiments are part of the way that you become an expert on your customer. And so for me, testing is how do we continually learn about how to better serve our customers through our web experience, through our free trial, through our freemium business, through the way that we interact with people through sales and customer success. And so for me, what you want to build within your organization is, do we have a culture of trying to be an expert on our customer? And what are we doing each month to learn more about those customers and how we can better serve them? I think if you do that, then experiments are a form of how you can learn about your customer, along with the other things kind of we've talked about, which is the customer research, talking to customers, some of the data you may already have.
What about HubSpot? How does obviously HubSpot, one of the leading tools for marketing automation, how does it help you kind of do that, be more data driven, make the right decisions?
Yeah, so we are spoiled. HubSpot, we have a full suite of tools. One of the things that we have is a CMS. And so we host all of our websites on our own CMS. And so what the beauty about the tool is, it aggregates all of the different things that you do across your engagement with us in a single contact record. So if I go to our certain pages, so if I'm a user and I go to our pricing page and then I download some information and then I reach out to a salesperson, I can see all of that interaction in the contact record. And so for us, we can use that data to start to see patterns in terms of what are commonalities between the people who want to buy our software and how can we better optimize that experience for it. So for me, the way it helps customers and helps all of our customers become more data driven is it first of all compiles all of the data into a single place. So a lot of companies have that data living across many different kind of point solutions. And then it provides you with really easy tools to be able to do a lot of A/B testing. So we do a lot of our testing again through HubSpot. I can easily test landing pages based upon the data I have about that person, test things on blog posts. The cool thing that I love about our software is we can test smart call to actions. So if I'm a first-time user and I come to our blog, I've never downloaded any content from HubSpot before, I can show this offer. And then the next time you come, because you've downloaded that offer, you visit our blog post, the call to action will dynamically switch to like a demo or a trial because you're further along in your buying experience.
That's really cool and really important. I was just at WordCamp Europe, and they had a talk there about AI and automation and the importance of actually changing the website according to the persona and their place in the funnel. What sort of I mean, a lot of our users are freelancers, people who do it themselves, and a lot of them, I think, are intimidated by going on to a CRM, and that doesn't impact me. That's for a company with hundreds of employees. How does a small business actually benefit from CRM?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I can give you like a personal example of like I in my spare time I have a little podcast, and I use HubSpot CRM to book guests and automate the email that goes out to the guests and automate reminders if that guest hasn't booked, because the CRM automatically, we have a little meetings tool, and the meetings tool will send a link to someone and they can find time in your calendar, and it will automatically update the contact record in the CRM when they're booked. So I think the CRM is the kind of like, it's interesting. Like I've worked with CRMs for a long time, and I would have always thought the same thing. Yeah, you need to be like a big business to get real value from this, but really the CRM is the hub of your entire business, whether you're small or large. And the stuff you can do with once you're gathering that information, your contacts in a single place, the stuff you can automate today versus maybe 2 to 3 years ago is just mind blowing. And so like a lot of what I've done on like my little personal side is automate the job of a whole person. Like I used to have a podcast assistant, and I don't need that person anymore because I've automated a ton of the different flows through the CRM. And so I think that like if I'm a freelancer and I'm kind of, find it very daunting, the thing I would ask myself is like, what parts of my process today can I automate? Because that gives me time back. And so there is some amount of time upfront investment you have to put in. Like it feels like, oh, well, I'm spending all this time on this thing and I'm not getting anything back in return. But if you get some of it automated, then the long-term benefit to you is you free up a ton of time to work on other stuff.
That makes total sense. I mean, everyone who has been a freelancer know that the pesky things is not the actual work. You love the work.
Yeah,
it's the email back and forth and reminding and all of those menial tasks that if you can automate, then you're also less prone to forget and make a mistake.
Exactly.
I think it's time we take a few questions from the audience. And Shanti9 asks, that relates to what we talked to before. How do you test value proposition with data?
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, I think you could test value proposition through copy. So you can there's a couple of ways you can do it. Like if you have even a tiny budget, you can test value propositions on Facebook. This is really interesting, right? Because you can, Facebook has so many data that you can build very, very specific audiences. So you can kind of mimic the audience that you think is a good fit for you. So let's say you're a freelancer and you're trying to sell web services to people in healthcare. You can get very specific about that on Facebook, and you can actually test different value propositions to see what people click on. Now, people may click on nothing, and what you've kind of demonstrated is maybe Facebook isn't a good platform for you to advertise on. Maybe there's better platforms. And then the other way you can do that is through your website. We test copy all the time, and we test value proposition all the time. And the way you would look at that is like, how do people do the action you want them to do? Kind of comparable to each value prop. So if we split test a page A, B, and C, different value props, we'll look to see which of those converts better, which of those has people go to learn more about the product, depending upon what action we want that person to take. But testing and value props that's a great use of your time in terms of what to test.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Let's see. Haydar Aleg asks, what about building a data culture? How did you manage to bring that data acumen to the whole team? Are you training people to make them talk the same language? That's interesting.
Yeah, I think the first thing, so I guess let me try to answer that and then they can reply if they think I've answered the incorrect question, because there's a lot in that. I think the first thing I would say is if you're in a business, the most important thing to do is to have a shared dashboard of what metrics are important. And so if that person is like inferring, how do you make sure that different teams are all speaking the same language? Then one way you do that is to ensure that you have some amount of data that you share in a dashboard and that these different teams see the business in the same way. And so we've gone through that process where we have marketing, sales, product, engineering, like the way we look at our business and our go-to-market is through these unified dashboards. So we're all speaking about the same metrics and we understand them in the same way. How you build a data culture, a culture of data, like that question is an interesting question. Like, are you trying to build, I know I keep saying this, but I wonder, and I'm kind of, again, riffing on this in my head, but are you trying to build a data culture or are you better building a culture that is an expert on your customer? And I know I keep bringing that up, but I would more be an advocate for building a culture who isn't building a culture around being an expert of your customer, about your customer, and data is one component of that versus like being a data, you can be data driven and have a data culture, but it needs to have a purpose. And I think that purpose is so we can better understand our customers and better understand how we can service our customers.
Oh, I totally agree with what you just said. And I'd like to add that I think you can fall into the trap of like falling in love with data and just becoming, I don't know, let's call them a marketer's marketer, like focusing entirely on metrics. But actually, once let's say I'm a freelancer and my clients are restaurants, then if I delve deep enough on restaurants, I'm going to have the questions. If I become an expert in restaurants, I'm going to have questions that I can test with data. So I have curiosity. Do you agree? Like it's something that'll come from curiosity and wanting to research and not from, I need to be data driven.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly what you said, which is data is part of how you answer a question, right? And actually the really good thing you said there is curiosity and how you better serve your customers is a way better culture to build than let's get data and all of the data we can. And I think data is how it's part of, I kind of said this earlier on, like data is part of your workflow. So in that instance, you're like, oh, I want to know more about how I can service gourmet restaurants in this area. That is the thing I need to try to do, is be a better company for those, a better service for those people. And how I'm going to do that is I'm going to talk to them and I'm going to gather some data about that segment. And I think data becomes part of your workflow.
Well, one question by Josh Allen is interesting. What tip do you have for Elementor users specifically to keep in mind when thinking of lead generation and the best methods for lead generation that will lead to better data-driven decisions in the future?
There is a whole probably book worth of what's good lead generation tactics. So it really, like, I don't want to give sweeping generalizations of what would be great for that person to do. I can, because every business is different. Like I see this all the time where you have this is the way you generate leads, create a blog and do this and do that. And in every business or industry, it's kind of different, right? I could probably in a certain industry generate enough leads dependent upon my business side through just marketing myself in Quora. Like maybe there's a lot of demand for the questions that I can answer on Quora, and I can figure out how to build an audience there and actually monetize that audience. And so I think the best leads, I hate to sound like a broken record, the best lead generation plan is, again, starts with your customer. If you understand how your customers are discovering services like yours, products like yours, then you can map the things that you should do to how they are actually finding those things. So, and if they want to follow up with the industry they're in, and anything like that, I can try to be more specific.
Yeah, I agree. I once I read, I think it was Joanna Weeb wrote this, that you can actually go into like product reviews or testimonials or and see what people are writing, what language they use to describe. If it's, even if you're a freelance web creator, like how do people describe others, like they
Yes.
helped them with what, and then use the same copy, test that copy against more generic copy. So that might
Yeah,
help with.
reviews are a treasure trove of information. Like I think one of the advantages we have over people in the past is that is a form of data. If you're a software company, you can go to the software review sites and look to see what everyone is saying about you and everyone is saying about your competitors, and you can sort it by good to bad, so you can see exactly what your competitors are not doing a good job on. It is like the amount of data we have available to us is great, but it's also bad as well, because we all have access to the same data. So it increases the knowledge of that, like all of us have of each other.
I agree, and I'll flip that also to the user, because if you go to a software that some of your customers are using, and you actually see those frustrations, you can actually solve them, like as a freelancer, as a service
Yes,
provider.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great idea.
Pixelate asks, what data do you need to be an expert in your customer? How should you get that data? And what questions should you ask?
Yep.
That's really from the description. Okay,
Yeah.
he's following
Okay.
through.
So yeah, I guess the questions are, so like I could just do a whole quick, maybe 5 minutes on customer research, because I think this is an integral part of how to be successful, is out research your competitor, like be a better expert on your customers than your competitors. And so one of the quotes I love from this is from a gentleman called Andy Johns. He's an investor, ex-Wealthfront, ex-Twitter. And one of the things he said on Twitter recently was, what startups and small solopreneurs startups really need to know is, who is the precise customer you're attempted to serve, and what can you offer them that's 10x relative to the alternatives. And so a good example for this is Andy's company, Wealthfront, right? They are a kind of automated way to build a portfolio, and it helps you to rebalance that portfolio. So it's like in the States, there's a lot of automated software that can kind of fill in for what a financial advisor would do for people who have a certain amount of capital. And so they've grown to become a big business. But when they were a very, very small business starting out, the customer they were trying to serve was so specific. It was an engineer at pre-IPO tech company, 25 to 35 years old. They had less than $1 million in net revenue. And that person was okay with having delegating that money management to a third party. Right? They were so specific. And the 10x value that they could offer them was they had lower costs relative to the traditional industry. It allowed you to build a portfolio through the platform and allowed you to easily rebalance that portfolio. So they were very clear on who is the person that I'm trying to serve and what is the 10x value that I'm trying to serve, or what is the 10x value of my product. And I think as you grow in size, the definition of your customer becomes a little bit more broad, because you're not going to be a huge customer with such a defined persona. It kind of grows bigger. And then to that person's question, like, how do you excel at customer research? Well, there's 3 fundamental parts. You kind of need to know who to ask, what to ask, and how to ask. And so in the who to ask, there's a really interesting quote from a guy called Aaron Krall. He's an amazing person at SaaS onboarding and all things email. And he had this really good quote where he said, you should really ask the top 4% of your customers, the ones who are generating the most revenue, the ones who are retaining for longer. And you can kind of double down on those and start to ask those customers, like, why do you actually love us as a product or a service? The other thing you can do is, dependent upon the business you're in, and maybe this isn't as applicable for service-based businesses, if you're in a product or in a kind of tech company, the general customers that we would use, the general users we would talk to outside of our customers, is we would ask our free users, because we have a freemium platform that allows you to use a product for free before you ever have to pay us a dime. We would ask unconverted free trial users, so people who take a trial of your product and don't convert, like, why didn't they convert? And then we would ask churn customers, so people who used to use your product and no longer use your product. And just to kind of round out, like, what would we ask, to give you guys some ideas of what questions you could ask. The things that we would ask is, like, if we took the product away from you tomorrow, what would you miss? And that's for the top 4% of your customers. Like, if you say to someone who loves your service, who loves your product, if we took this away from you, like, what would you actually miss? And then the other question I love to ask is, how are you solving this problem before purchasing the product? That's a fascinating question, right? They've always had this problem. This problem usually didn't exist just because you're in the world. So what were they actually doing before they actually used your product? And then the last one I would leave you with is a really interesting one, because it's really how you should think about your brand. And it's, if I had to convince a friend to use this product, how would I recommend it to them? Because that's how people think about you. And that's what your brand is in that person's head. And so that's just some, I guess, some snippets of how you can really start to think about becoming an expert within your customer.
I love that. And I think it's super relevant, because I think that if someone is building websites for a living, they're not just building templates. They're actually, in order to build a successful website, you need to understand how the business works. So if you apply that, you have a client, they are a gourmet restaurant, or they sell insurance. You need to understand what is how does their sales work right now, and you can implement that in their website. Once you bring them value as in their actual business, they'll appreciate it a lot more than you build them a nice landing page or nice homepage.
Yeah, and it shows that you know that customer, and it shows you know who they are, what their goals are, what audience they're trying to serve. And that is how you kind of win, I think, in business today, because we're democratizing everything else. Like, we have so much software that we can use to run our businesses, to build our websites. If you're a freelancer, you have access to amazing platforms to build websites on. You have amazing tools like Elementor. Like, we have access to all of these tools. And so you're competing against other people who also have access to those tools. And so the way that you can differentiate yourself, I think, is by being a true expert on your customer. And that shines through in the work you do, the way you speak to them, in the way that you can kind of sell them on your value and talk in their language.
Great, Kieran. And we have time for just one more question. So for someone starting out, how would you recommend learning more about data-driven and data-driven marketing and marketing automation?
Yeah, I think so again, I don't know if I wouldn't set myself a goal of being more data-driven marketing. I would probably set my goal. I would set my goal in terms of what are the questions that I'm trying to answer. And so you have the questions you're trying to answer. I think from this conversation, there's two core buckets you can think about, which is, what are the things I need to know about my customer, and what's the best way of learning those? Can I go and speak to them? Is there information I can get from my data platform today? Maybe I'm using Google Analytics. Maybe I'm using some other tools. What information can I get from those? And then maybe there's some experiments I could run. I could try some different messaging, some value, like my unique value propositions, and test those things. So I think you have that part. And then the other part of data is, do I know what is the most important metric for me to focus on to be successful? And so what is the data I need to be informed about my customer? And what is the data I need to know what is the data I need to be successful against and make an impact against for me to grow the business in the way that I want to grow it? And then I think there was how do you want to learn? If you wanted to learn about marketing automation, HubSpot has a whole academy where we have tons of information that's just not about HubSpot, but just about how do you be a better marketer, marketing automation. There's an amazing course from Elementor in there, which is people love. But it's not just HubSpot. You can go to many different places and learn about automation, marketing automation, and kind of what metrics. But I do think they don't know your business. All of these articles don't know your business. You kind of know that you need to know those questions first, I think, before it's going to be really applicable and useful for you.
Well, Kieran, That was really great. How can people follow you, listen to your podcast, and learn more about it?
Yeah, so you can so basically you can follow me at a weird Twitter name. There's a story behind it, but it's too long for this. At SearchBrat on Twitter. You can check out HubSpot has a podcast called The Growth Show, which is a really great show. We cover things in series like Netflix. So there's 8 episodes per series. You can go check that out. You just need to search for HubSpot podcast. And if you want to go learn more, we have a ton of information on our blogs. Hopefully some people here are already readers.
Thank you, Kieran. It's very hard to grasp, but interesting topic. And I think you really gave a lot of enlightening highlights about it.
Great.
And thanks for being in the webinar.
Cool. Appreciate you having me.
And thanks everyone for listening and watching us. I remind you that every month we have this webinar, so be sure to subscribe to get informed about the next episodes. So until next time, bye everyone.
Bye everyone.